the question or the conversation came up from a statement made out there in podcast land, radio land, about college recruiting and building a collegiate roster right now. And we got a clip of the audio that kind of prompted today's conversation. So we're going to play the clip just to give context. But the question that we're going to ask is around how you build a program in today's climate of NIL and the transfer portal, all of the things, how to do that best. So the clip, for context, is coming from the Three-Man Front show
Yep.
that is out there. I believe it's on Jocks Radio, if I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah. Our guy
mistaken.
Pat Smith. I go on there regularly, and I love those guys over there. They do great work. Our guy Cole Kubelik is over there on Jocks, as
Mhm.
well as Greg McElroy, who we work with. So, yeah, it was SEC Mike.
Mhm.
Mike Brayton is his name. Follow him on Twitter at SEC Mike, and he made the comment, "We're about to play for you now."
Yeah, so we're going to play his comments, and then we're going to come back and have a quick discussion about it. Let's hear what SEC Mike had to say about not just in general, but he made some very specific comments about the way Coach Hugh Freeze is building his program. But let's take a listen.
I'm not buying the hype. I don't like the way Hugh Freeze is going about this. I ain't spending $1 million on a quarterback, but you don't have to go to the dollar store to get a quarterback either, Hugh. I think his reputation is overblown because he beat Alabama twice. People forget that he lost to Vanderbilt twice in that same span. I think he is not an elite coach, and I don't like the way he's building it through high school. You could do that 4 or 5 years ago. I think you have to do it in the portal these days. I think there's a good chance heading into next season, Hugh Freeze is on one of the hotter seats in the SEC.
All right, comments there from SEC Mike. Let's address a couple of things before we get into the meat of the conversation that we had. That we have on tap for his comments. First and foremost, he says he's not buying the hype of Coach Hugh Freeze, right? He's not buying into whatever everybody's trying to sell about him. He's a little overblown, overrated. Number one. And I mean, I guess we can debate about how overrated Coach Hugh Freeze
Or
is,
how
but I
hype
think
he
that's kind of,
is,
I was about
really.
to say, I think that's a little
Yeah.
like, I think you're making more of Coach Hugh Freeze than I think everybody else is, but I think that's debatable. This is where I want to camp out for just like half a second before we get into our
Okay.
full conversation, because hearing the comments again, it made me remember this portion of it. He said specifically, quoting something from Hugh Freeze, that I don't want to spend $1 million on a quarterback. He said, but on the other side, you don't have to go to the dollar store to get a quarterback. Is that a shot at Peyton Thorne, calling him a dollar store quarterback?
I'm gonna go with no.
Okay.
Yeah, I think what he was trying to do there was to say there's a medium between, paying $1 million and just getting just any old guy to come in through the portal. Maybe not very
Which
well
I
worded.
agree with
Yeah,
100%.
yeah. And so I think maybe that's where I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt there. Like, I think that's where he was trying to go. I met SEC Mike at Media Days when we were there, Ike, 2 years ago, Atlanta. And, again, seemed like a nice guy. Introduced himself, gave me his card. And, at the time, I didn't. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, our listeners have told me repeatedly since yesterday that there's a history with this guy in Hugh Freeze that maybe even predates Auburn, and there could be some biases there, which is why he kind of made that stretch. But just my thought. I think that's. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt there and say that's where he was going. Focusing on the medium between $1 million
I mean, that's
and
fine. I don't understand, like, you don't have to go to the dollar store to get a quarterback, as if, Auburn has like nobody playing quarterback right now. So like, I don't know. Anyway, all right. So let's
right.
go
Yeah.
back
Like,
to building the
I get
program.
you. Like you, you got a guy who averaged about 3,000 yards in his 2 previous seasons prior to getting to Auburn. So that's not exactly the dollar story. I'm with you. And led an 11-2 squad while throwing for 3,200 yards. So, yeah, that's not the dollar store. Peyton Thorne is not a dollar store quarterback. Yeah.
All right. Other portion of what he said. Coach Hugh Freeze, he has a feeling, will be on the hot seat going into not this season coming up, but the next season? So is he forecasting Auburn not having a good, because I mean, if he's going to be on a hot seat, that means Auburn's got to have a
Yeah,
bad year.
yeah. I'm glad you asked this question exactly this way, right? So to say that Hugh Freeze is going to be the hot seat going into next season, you're predicting a 6-6 or worse season.
That's the only way I can
Only way
see
he
that
ends up
being the
in the
case.
hot seat, right? Like,
Not with the way that he's recruiting, you have to have a terrible outcome on the field for a hot seat to even be in the conversation.
correct, yeah. So he's predicting a 6-6 season, and he's saying Auburn makes no progress this season at all. That's
Yeah.
it. Statistically, they don't move forward. And yes, that would land him on the hot seat, I think, going
Yes.
into year 3. But
I would agree.
how likely is that though? Right? I mean, you've got to miss on a lot for that to be true. Think about this. Again, you had enough talent to beat Alabama last year. Fact, right? 4th and 31. New Mexico State, yeah, okay, they brought their A game. If you watch the recent mix segment that we did with Elijah McAllister, I asked him about that game. I said, "How does that happen?" And look, it happens. Give them credit, but that's not a game he's likely to lose again.
Right.
Right? You can play that game 100 times. He's not going to lose that game again. So there are 2 wins just sitting out there. Yeah, if you get those this year, you're an 8-win team, which definitely wouldn't have him on the hot seat.
Right.
So he is forecasting like regression for Auburn in year 2. And I've been pretty consistent about this. If you are not moving forward, you're moving backwards. In my mind, in the SEC, there's no such thing as standing still, because while you're standing still, everybody else is getting better.
Right.
Right. So if you're not moving forward, you're moving backwards. And I don't think there's any in between there. How likely is it that Auburn moves backwards? Very, very, very unlikely. Cam Coleman has to be a bust. Perry Thompson has to be a bust. Malcolm Simmons has to be a bust. Bryce Kane has to be a bust. Jarquez Hunter has to regress, right? Like, nobody behind Jarquez Hunter can do anything. And if you believe what everyone told us about this wide receiver core the last couple of years, it couldn't have been any worse. Rivaldo Fairweather would have to regress. I mean, 6 wins was so unlikely last year. Even with the talent that they had, it was kind of a perfect storm of like coaching mishaps and talent gap issues. But yeah, I just don't see how you could look at this, barring mass injuries to very important positions,
Right.
and say that they're going to be the same or worse than 6-6. Like, that's not based in anything factual. That is projecting based on what you feel he's done in the past. But even if you look at his past, there's no statistical basis for that in anything that he's done in his past.
Yeah.
Everywhere
Yeah.
he's been, he's
gotten
moved it
better.
forward in year
Yeah. I was
2.
about to say year
Yeah,
2, he's gotten better at
yeah.
every stop that he's
So
played.
I
I mean, he's coached. So.
I don't know. I don't know. I have more to say, but I'll stop there and let you.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. Like, I just don't know how you land there based upon anything that's actually transpired to this point. I'm not predicting an Auburn national championship, but to say Coach Hugh Freeze, I have a feeling he will be on the hot seat, is a very different statement from if Coach Hugh Freeze doesn't pull it together this season, he'll be on the hot seat.
Correct.
That to me is a more balanced and logical thing to say than to say, I have a feeling this is going to happen next year, because I'm not buying into the hype.
Well, again, to be clear, there's a scenario where he does land on the hot seat in year 3. It just involves a lot of very unlikely events that would be worst case scenario. And even if those things happened, right? Like, if those things happened, I would argue a lot of things that would lead to a 6-6 season would be freakish things that you would probably give him a pass on.
That's exactly where I would go next.
Yeah.
Is like the convergence of things that would have to happen that lands you there. You'd have to believe it was all because of poor coaching decisions on Coach Hugh Freeze's part. Oh, like, for instance, him deciding, Peyton Thorne's playing terribly. Let's just keep playing. Let's
Correct.
ride it out.
Correct.
Like, that kind of stuff. Okay, all right. I could see someone saying, all right, wait a minute, Coach Freeze.
Yeah.
Are you sure you understand what we need to be doing here from the quarterback position?
Or repeated awful play calls that cost you multiple games late in the fourth
Right,
quarter, right?
right.
Like where it's just kind of where
Multiple, right? Like not one or two, like it's got to be
yeah, like
2 or
3
3 games where
yeah,
like,
where
bro,
you
like
lose,
you
yeah.
really had a chance to win this game and you made some
Very
very
bad
poor
calls. Yeah.
strategic, you not calling a timeout in a scenario where you should have, or calling a timeout in a dumb spot, or going for it on 4th down inside your own territory multiple, like crazy Lane Kiffin kind of stuff.
Coaching malpractice.
Yeah,
Essentially, he'd have to commit coaching malpractice to land up on the hot seat in. But again, what in his past are you looking at that suggests that that will be the case in year two?
right.
That's it. Again, I have some more points I'm going to get to, but let's work through
Yeah.
this here because
So
there's a lot
yeah,
to
so
unpack.
let's go to the crux of the conversation, right? Which is the thing I think that's the most interesting thing for us and our purposes is the statement was about he does not feel SEC Mike is does not feel as if Coach Hugh Freeze is building this program the correct way for the current climate of collegiate football. He made the statement that um, Coach Hugh Freeze, who has noted in saying, he said it to you, he said it to us multiple times, that he believes the way to do this is to build it from high school, which, let me go ahead and spoiler alert, I've said it before, I agree with,
Yeah,
is the correct way to do this. Build it from high school. SEC Mike disagrees. He says that you've got to do it from the transfer portal, which is kind of, let's just park out on
yeah,
how
more from the
crazy
portal.
it
Yeah,
is how crazy it is to say that as if Coach Hugh Freeze is adopting a Dabo Swinney approach, which is I'm not going to take anybody from the portal. It's just going to be the guy. Like if he were talking about Dabo in that statement, I might say might understand how he has pitted Coach Freeze against the transfer portal,
hmm
but Coach Freeze has taken plenty of transfers in his first 2 seasons, so I'm not really sure I understand making it Coach Hugh Freeze being an anti-portal guy. But let's just talk about the actual conversation here is what do we feel like is the most important and how is that going to impact the way that you build a program? Is it high school recruiting or is it leaning heavily into the transfer portal?
Look, uh, if we're talking about sustainability, it is 100% high school recruiting. Look, the line, all the outside of the skill positions, right? The things that have set the SEC apart from other conferences consistently have been offensive and defensive line. The monsters in the middle, and those guys aren't, there are not a lot of portal guys there. Those are guys who come up in your system from high school and they develop and they step in and you know they get big and strong under your tutelage. And think about it. This is find like finding offensive linemen in the portal has been so difficult for Auburn. You know why? Because there's just not a ton of them there. You got to recruit those guys from high school. You have to recruit those guys from high school, and you know that's where I think this is at, right? Like I think that you have to be focused on high school, and you have to be focused on finding guys who you can develop in your culture. If you're not doing that, right, you're essentially just going out and hiring mercenaries every year to come
Right.
in. That's it. And literally hiring because of what it's going to cost you to get those guys. I'm
Right.
sorry, but like you don't have enough money to go out and get all the guys you need.
Yeah, I think that's a key portion of this is yes, the transfer portal is useful, but how do you get to a because I'm assuming he's talking about building a championship roster, not just putting 22 guys out on the field. How do you get to a championship roster building that without having strong high school recruiting to undergird it?
Right.
Like, how many guys can you feasibly get from the transfer portal that are going to be difference makers for your team without having strong high school recruiting as well? Like I don't know how you juxtapose those two things.
Right.
To your point, you're basically turning yourself into a mercenary squad where it's like, you know, we're gonna hire the best. Like how many guys are transformational in that way towards your program that you feel like are going to be necessary if you're going to abandon doing it via the high. I just don't know how
Yeah,
what those
but
numbers look at
also
like.
claiming that he's not focusing on the portal is
Yes, it's weird. Like,
yeah.
how is Hugh Freeze the poster boy for
Yeah,
that?
yeah, I don't understand that either because in his first season he went to the portal for a quarterback.
Correct.
In his first season, he went to the portal and he spent money on a quarterback. And they went and they tried to get some guys. They went out and they got Batee, right? And they got Peyton Thorne, and they went out and got pieces shorter
Multiple wide
and yeah,
receivers, went out and got
yeah.
defensive
Now,
linemen, like the
now
linebackers.
your options are limited at first in the portal because of what you where your program is at.
Right.
Right? Because you're trying to make Auburn an attractive spot for recruits from the portal to want to land. And you can't do that. That takes time.
Right.
I don't like all of this takes time. And that takes me to my last point, about this in particular. When Hugh Freeze got hired, because circling back around the hot seat conversation, when Hugh Freeze got hired, a conversation was had between him, athletic director John Cohen, and the president of the university about what the strategy was for getting Auburn back to where they need to be.
Right.
And Freeze has been adamant that the way to do that is through high school, and it's going to take some time. It's recruiting. Everyone complained about recruiting under Harsin. Well, to recruit, you don't even know how a recruiting class is going to turn out until 2-3 years down the road.
Right.
For sure. So that takes time. So to say that they all agreed on how to build this thing, but then in the same breath to say he's going to land up on the hot seat in year 3 doesn't make any sense.
I mean, listen, to Coach Hugh Freeze again, for all of the sometimes we feel like the messaging is a little off. He's been very clear on what the directives have been from he said this himself. If by what did he say, year 3, we're not landing top 5 classes, we're all going to be looking for jobs.
Right.
That to me says there's a very clear directive from the administration. Go out there and recruit some high caliber guys or go find another job. And he went out there with a ferocity and said, I am going to attack this recruiting like never before and make sure that becomes a priority for me on my day-to-day. So if you're doing the stuff people who hired you asked you to do, how do you then also land on the hot seat?
Yeah.
And he's doing it well. It's not as if he has a focus on high school recruitment and he's failing
at it. Right. Yeah.
He's kicking ass.
Yeah, right. Remember, everyone got up in arms when I said this. Oddly enough, on 3-man front. Maybe they're a magnet for controversial statements. Well, I went on 3-man front and I told the world, outside of recruiting, Hugh Freeze's year 1 wasn't much, if any, better than Harsin's year 1.
Yeah, and which I agreed with. I've said that on the show, and I took flack for it too.
Yeah. Fired both coordinators, right? Embarrassing loss, like last-minute loss to Alabama, blown Iron Bowl, embarrassing bowl game loss, 6-6, except for Freeze added the G5 loss.
Right.
Now, that's terrible, right? But he preached that it was going to take time. And the thing that he did set out to do was establish a good recruiting base. He succeeded at that. He succeeded at that. So I don't know, I just don't know how you can look at all that when you're talking about Auburn and say, oh, well, he's going to be on the hot seat in year 3. No, it would have to be like some 2012 3-9 stuff.
Yeah.
And when you're losing that many games, it really, really points to some other kind of dysfunction going on in a program. Like what we heard about Gene Chizik after 2012 was that he was losing the locker room and guys were doing crazy things. And there was a lot of other things that were going on inside the program there that got him fired after winning a national title just like 2 years before. So if yours predict, I don't know how you would predict that that's going to happen under Freeze. I mean, if you are doing that, something the rest of us don't know. You're inside the coach's filing cabinet at that point.
Yeah.
looking at documents, and you know something the rest of us don't know. Other than that, I think he's asked for patience. I think he has it from his administration, and he's just trying to make sure it stays there for fans so they stay positive for the players while they work through this process. He's
Yeah.
been very, very consistent on that. And to say, you can say, okay, I disagree with it, but like acting like that can't work, like that's not going to, that can't, there's no chance that's going to work.
Well, I mean, so that's the question that we ask, right? Like, does it make sense to build it from high school, right? Like, and
100%.
uh, I don't know I don't know how this becomes transfer portal versus high school, right? Like, you can lean into one more than you lean into the other, but I'd still argue outside of Florida State last year, who had an immaculate run towards uh, a playoff contention program, right? There aren't examples of guys who have played this lease program and had success. And Florida State, you can argue, got penalized for it because the guy that they brought in for quarterback, who was the linchpin of the whole thing, he goes down. And now all of a sudden, everybody's like, well, you guys don't deserve to go any further.
Right.
And they've got all of these talented guys from the transfer portal. The vast majority of that team came from the transfer portal, of the key contributors for that Florida State team.
Yeah.
But you can't point to examples of teams that have, in this new era, built these powerhouse programs in the transfer portal. It doesn't
Yeah.
exist.
I would say that if there's an exception to this rule, it's probably Lane Kiffin.
I still don't know. I mean, how is he an exception to what does he want?
I mean, he's if there were a 12-team playoff last year, 10-2 is nothing. I mean, they lost 2 games and they only lost to Georgia and
Yeah,
Alabama
I'm
last
not
year.
saying that he doesn't have a good program. I'm asking what has. I'm talking about the standard is championship football, right? Like, where is the championship for the portal kings out there, for the guys who've been
Yeah,
killing
sure.
it in the
Yeah,
portal?
yeah,
Where's
yeah.
the
Yeah,
championship?
I agree with that. I'm just saying, like, like he's kept his team competitive and way above 500 for a few years while getting a large percentage of guys from the portal. That's as close to a example I could point at from somebody who is
Yeah, you can
probably
get close.
more focused on portal than high school recruiting. But he also does a really good job developing quarterbacks, and he he evaluates very well, I think. He has a system. It hasn't gotten him over the hump yet, and I would argue it's not really talent that's holding him back. I think it's coaching that's holding him back. Personally, like he does some things really well, but and he's a really good play caller. But is he the best crunch time play caller? I don't know. I think there's enough talent there at Ole Miss to win. But
Yeah,
again,
for sure.
they are 100
I think
percent
he's put together a phenomenal team this year too.
yeah,
And
yeah.
he's got probably has his best conglomerate of talent that he's ever had at one
Yeah,
time.
but he's absolutely the anomalous data point in this, and there may be two other coaches at major college football that can take this strategy and be successful. The rest of them, right, like the Ohio States, these guys find diamonds in the rough, but it's because they built successful programs through high school recruiting. And if you're a prime quarterback and you're trying to make a decision about where to go play football, and that takes me to my other point about this whole like portal thing. Like, you can't just focus on portal and then just be good at. I would argue that portal recruiting is more competitive than high school recruiting in today's day and age when you add
Easily.
the dollars in, right?
Yeah,
Like,
easily.
because there are a small percentage of guys in the portal that are worth the investment.
Right.
And you're battling all the top dogs for those guys. Where at the high school level, there may be more diamonds in the rough. Like, think about it from the portal. These guys have fleshed out for the most part. There are not a ton of guys that are transferring because if things are going so great, they're not transferring.
Right.
A large percentage of a majority of the guys in the portal, it didn't work out where they were at. And a lot of the good names in the portal are just coming from programs where they're already overstocked with talent, right? And you know why they're overstocked with talent? Because they have a strong high school recruiting.
Right.
Either way, this thing comes back to high school recruiting. You cannot escape it. Hugh Freeze understands that. And I think that it was a great strategy for him in terms of buying himself and his staff the patience from the administration to let him build this thing up. Now he
Yeah.
did tout that he turns programs around quickly, but I think he's realistic as well too. That hey, once I get a look at where Auburn is at on the lines and like where he felt like the skill positions were at, you've got to go out, and he felt like he had to find a Cam Coleman. Here's I'll end on this. So we last show we talked a lot about Juju Lewis, Ike,
Hmm.
and Auburn going out to get Juju Lewis, and there were a lot of people in our comment section arguing about the implications of Auburn going after Juju Lewis. There's a couple things we agree on. You got to recruit that position every single year, no matter what. Right.
Right.
I think in today's college football, going after a guy like Juju Lewis, given where the rest of your roster is at that position, means that if you're bringing that guy in, it's likely that there's going to be a strong push to play him immediately as well too.
Right.
So it's tough. Like you got to feel like he's a transformational talent. I think if you're going to play him early, well, when you look at the guys that Auburn has gone after, they have been guys that will immediately raise the bar in those rooms. Now, like in the portal, you're just not going to get a high percentage of those guys. And this is where the money comes in. Where he's saying, well, you don't have to go to the dollar store, right? And there's a happy medium.
I have to wonder if this is all about the quarterback though,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
again,
right.
like it has to that the vast majority of this has to center
It's
around the
around
quarterback
quarterback. Yeah,
position
yeah.
because you look at the rest of the roster, how many transfers right now, and we'll do a whole thing and
Sure.
diving into the portal, but like it's not as I'm baffled by this. Is he's not doing the thing where he's like, I don't want to go to the transfer. When he goes to transfer portal, he
Well,
gets a
yeah,
bunch of guys that are contributing on a
yeah.
consistent
Well,
basis.
yeah, but
So
he also is very judicious about how he's just not throwing money into the transfer portal hoping to hit the lottery, right?
right,
They're really evaluating whether those guys fit what they're trying to do and whether to go after them or not. And we told everybody this offseason they would not go after a portal QB and got
right,
called names. And, I said, listen, he's going to have to be a really kind of game breaking guy for them to go this route. I can't miss
right.
at this point because you have
And the can't miss guys cost too
too
much.
much. They cost a lot of money, and
Yeah,
you're battling a lot of programs for those guys. So if you're trying to balance recruiting strong quarterbacks from high school with getting game changers out of the portal, it's a difficult discussion because what they're going to see is if I'm a freshman, if I'm a 5-star freshman, I want to be starting by year 2 latest in today's college football. If you're bringing in some guy with 3 years worth of experience, but like 2 years of eligibility left to play, that might mean year 3 for me.
right.
And you don't want to, a lot of kids don't want to go in knowing that they're probably going to be sitting behind a guy for 2 years. Meanwhile, a lot can happen in those 2 years. This is why kids are not patient anymore, Ike. They want to
Yeah,
hit the field because they're always trying to bring somebody in that's better than you. And
yeah.
you're willing to wait that out in today's college football, 1 year at the most. And then you want to be the guy. That's the situation. It was an absolute shock that Texas got Arch Manning to come back to me. Right? I was like, oh, because you just never know what's going to happen. And he feels like I have start now talent.
Yeah.
There was a lot of noise in the Texas fan base about whether the investment into Arch was so much that Ewers was going to get pitched. Right?
But you see, it cost him Malik Murphy in that entire
It
process.
did. It
Though.
did. It cost you somebody, right?
Right.
And so that's the balance that Hugh Freeze has to do, right? Because it's not just the guys on your roster that it might cost you; it's the guys, the game changers, the program changers out of high school that it might cost you when you go after. All these kids are looking at this. You took a top wide receiver. Why would I come to your program? I'm gonna be sitting behind this guy. So, Hugh Freeze is still building the model for what prospective student athletes are going to look at when they consider Auburn, and they haven't shown it quite yet on the field. And this year is about taking one more step towards putting something on the field that athletes can look at and say, I fit into that.
Right.
Then your recruiting becomes more clear through the portal and through high school.
Yeah.
Give these
And
portal guys something to look at right now.
that's the other difficult thing, right? Is like Coach Hugh Freeze in last year didn't do enough on the field to really convince any of the top portal targets that this was a good landing
Yeah,
spot
you
for
can
them.
go after them, sure, but
Yeah.
it doesn't mean they're going to come to your program. So the whole focus, the idea of you're not focusing enough on this. Look, I don't. It might not be a good idea for him to focus on it based on where his program is at. Because while you're
And what
focusing,
he's good at. Like, why am I gonna try to do something? I know I'm good at this.
yeah,
He's great at high
high
school.
school
Like,
recruiting, yeah,
anybody who would argue that Coach Hugh Freeze is not good at high school recruiting is being
that's
disingenuous. Like that,
disingenuous. Yeah,
like I just that's like me trying to convince you that Lane Kiffin isn't good at going after the transfer portal. He
yeah,
is.
he is very
Like I
good at
would
it.
I'd
Yeah,
I'd never say that. That's a silly thing for me. As many things as I've said about Lane Kiffin that can be construed as negative, it's just a lot of it I say on purpose. I would never say he's not good at going and getting transfer portal targets. Like he does it well. But the question here still remains like, or I guess the statement is, I don't know that they showed enough offensively last year for top. Keandre Lambert Smith uh is probably I don't know what they had to say to that young man to get him to come to like honestly, like if I'm a top wide receiver target, I don't know how I land at
that's
Auburn, like just
facts.
being honest, based upon what you've shown on the field so far as passing is
Right,
concerned.
right.
They had to really sell that young man. And I'm wondering, what it was that they sold him. But that's difficult
They,
because you haven't shown the propensity to get the ball to your playmakers. You
yeah,
haven't shown a propensity to have enough targets to spread the ball around to all these guys that are coming in. So he had an uphill battle just having the conversation with somebody. Let's not even get into actually landing them here.
yeah. It's only been 1 year for Hugh Freeze, and this is a conversation I think you have after year two. But after year one, right after you land a top 10 class, is not the time to have the conversation about which way is the way to do it. So they had the type of year one that a lot of people anticipated
Hmm.
based on where people felt Auburn was at, given the last coach got fired. They didn't think it was headed the right direction. They bemoaned uh, uh, the lack of talent at certain positions. There was no depth, and offensive line continued to be an issue. Quarterbacks were running for their life. No QB development. Those are not things that you fix overnight. And so I think that you go to high school, you find kids there, and you find, look, man, you put yourself in a position that if you have to go to the portal for a QB, you have so much talent around him that he's going to be stepping into. I've got these receivers that have been here for years. I've got a line that's developed, which you definitely are going to have to put together through high school for the most part, and we've got a system. We just need to plug you into it, and it works.
Right.
He doesn't have that yet. That's why I think going to the portal to do it is a bad idea right now. I think it works for the guys who have established programs and they have
Right.
clear holes that they need to fill where they can show a guy where it fits. So, just my
And
thought.
and most of those guys still aren't majoring on the portal, right? Like the portal hasn't been the way they're plugging in key pieces here and there. It's like, all right, we're like 2 pieces away. We'll go get those 2 pieces from the portal,
Right.
right? It's not I'm 8 pieces away and I'm gonna try to get 8 of them from the transfer portal. That's not how that's
Yeah,
working
it's,
here.
it's, it's crazy. So look, man, you know, SEC Mike, he's grown extraordinary platform, and but on this, I can't. I was having a hard time finding a middle ground when I heard this, and at first, it came off, and I was like, wait, I'm sorry, what? And then I sat back and I tried to be introspective about this and think, all right, is there any way Hugh Freeze could be doing this better than what he's doing right now? I felt like most of the issues he had were on the field in terms of how he managed the balance between, you know, recruiting and game planning. Certainly there was improvement that could be made there. But he was highly successful at the thing that he put his mind to, given what he had to work with and where Auburn was currently at. This class was nuts. The wide receiver class, think about it. You showed nothing, and you
Yeah.
brought in Cam Coleman and Perry Thompson, Malcolm Simmons, and Bryce King.
Yeah.
You were bottom of the league in passing. and you got those guys to come here. That's phenomenal. I don't like, that's a mix of NIL, obviously, and a little bit of luck. I think with Cam Coleman, because if Jimbo Fisher doesn't get fired, I still think he goes to Texas A&M. But look, he put himself in position to capitalize
Right.
on what happened there, and you got to give him credit for that as well too.
Brought to you by show sponsor Golden's Cast Iron. Whether you work out, grill out, or chill out, Golden's Cast Iron has got you covered. Make sure you hit them up at goldenscastiron.com/WR to get 15% off of weights. You need to use code Get Your Weight Up. If you want $65 off of your fire pit or Kamado grill, you need to be using code TWR. For full episodes, make sure you head over to the War Report's YouTube channel and check out the Weekend Tailgate. Every Sunday, we're going live. Join us on the live stream at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. Until the next time, War Eagle.